My nephew set up a dating profile for me while I was in the shower. Under, "What are you looking for?" he wrote. "Someone intimidating, probably older, definitely smarter than you." I told him that was ridiculous. Then I walked into the office Monday morning and met my new mentor. But I'm getting ahead of myself. My name is Reid. I'm 32, recently divorced and sleeping in my childhood bedroom for the first time since I was 17. The posters are gone. The twin bed is the same. There's something about lying in a bed your feet hang off of that reminds you exactly how far backward you've traveled. The divorce wasn't dramatic. No affairs, no screaming, no courtroom standoff. Just two people who got married because they were 26 and scared of being 26 alone. We were kind to each other about it, signed everything, split the furniture, shook hands in the parking lot of the lawyer's office like we'd just closed on a house neither of us wanted. I moved back to Cedar Lake because I didn't know where else to go. My sister offered her guest room. My parents offered the house they'd just emptied when they downsized to the lake cottage. And I thought, fine, I'll regroup here. Get my license transferred. Start selling houses in the town I grew up wanting to leave. That last part felt like a punchline nobody was telling. I joined Mercer and Shaw Realty because they were hiring and because Lydia Shaw answered my cold email within 11 minutes. That should have been my first warning. Nobody responds to a cold email that fast, unless they're desperate or efficient in a way that should scare you. Lydia was the second kind. She ran the brokerage from a converted Victorian on Main Street. The floors creaked. The conference room smelled like old wood and fresh coffee. There were 8 agents on the board, and every one of them had closed more in the last quarter than I had in my entire previous career in Grand Rapids. I showed up Monday morning in a tie I'd ironed badly and shoes I'd polished with a paper towel. The lobby had a leather couch, a fern that looked healthier than I felt, and a whiteboard with the month's closings listed in blue marker. The numbers were absurd. Lydia met me at the front desk. She was mid-50s, silver hair pulled back, reading glasses on a chain. She looked at me the way a mechanic looks at a car someone just towed in. "Reid Calloway?" "That's me." "You're early." I didn't want to be late. She looked at me for another second. "We'll see how long that lasts." Then she walked me through the office, introduced me to a few agents, showed me the listing room, the staging closet, the kitchen, where someone had labeled their creamer with a passive-aggressive sticky note that read, "Mine, G-Reg." She gave me a desk near the window, a laptop with a cracked screen protector, and a schedule that started at 7:30 every morning. "One more thing," she said. "You're being assigned a mentor." I nodded, expected. Vivian Cross. The name meant nothing to me, but I watched the agent at the next desk glance up, then look back down too quickly. Like someone had said a word you don't repeat in polite company. "Vivian's our top producer," Lydia continued. "She's closed more volume in the past 18 months than most agents manage in 5 years. She's precise. She's fast. She doesn't repeat herself." Sounds great. She also didn't volunteer for this. I sat with that for a second. Meaning what? Meaning I told her she was doing it, and she looked at me like I'd suggested she adopt a stray. Lydia adjusted her glasses. "Don't take it personally. Vivian doesn't like interruptions, and right now you're an interruption. But you'll learn more from 6 weeks with her than 6 months with anyone else on this floor." I wanted to say something confident. What I said was, "Okay." Lydia walked away. I sat at my desk and stared at my cracked screen protector and wondered how many ways this could go wrong. The answer showed up 14 minutes later. Vivian Cross walked through the front door, carrying a leather portfolio and a black coffee that she hadn't taken a single sip of yet. I knew she hadn't sipped it because the lid was still sealed, and I noticed the lid because I was watching her the way everyone in that office watched her, which was carefully. She was maybe 5'7", dark hair, shoulder length, tucked behind one ear, a charcoal blazer that fit like it had been tailored by someone who understood the difference between sharp and severe. No jewelry except a thin silver watch. No smile. She didn't glance around the room. She walked straight to her desk on the far wall, set her coffee down, opened her portfolio, and started writing something. The whole office seemed to organize itself around her, not deferring exactly, just aware. The way you're aware of the person in the room who could dismantle your argument without raising their voice. I looked at the agent next to me, a guy named Pete who sold lakefront properties and wore boat shoes indoors. "That's Vivian?" Pete nodded slowly. "Good luck. People keep saying that. There's a reason." "Helpful." Pete leaned back. "She's not mean. She doesn't do small talk. She doesn't do hand-holding. She'll teach you everything she knows, but she'll do it at her pace, and if you can't keep up, she won't slow down. So she's a good mentor." Pete thought about it. "She's a great agent. Whether that makes her a good mentor depends on how thick your skin is." I looked across the room at Vivian. She was still writing. Her posture was perfect, the kind of posture that comes from something deeper than habit. I thought about what Lydia had said. She looked at me like I'd suggested she adopt a stray. I was the stray. Great. That evening, I drove back to my parents' old house. Jaden was on the couch with his laptop, eating cereal out of a mixing bowl because we hadn't unpacked the regular bowls yet. Jaden is my nephew, 15, my sister's kid. She'd taken a contract job in Tucson for the summer and asked if he could stay with me, which was optimistic language for "I have no other option and you currently have the least complicated life of anyone in this family." She wasn't wrong. Jaden was the kind of 15-year-old who could fix your router, hack your email, and make you feel old about it, all without looking up from his screen. He had dark hair that fell over his eyes and a way of speaking that suggested he'd already figured out the punchline before you finished the setup. "How was day one?" he asked. "Promising." "You're lying." "I'm being optimistic." "Same thing." He took a bite of cereal. "I made you a dating profile, by the way." I stopped in the doorway. "You did what?" "While you were in the shower." "You take forever, by the way." I had time to do the whole thing. Photos, bio, preferences. "Jaden, you're welcome." I sat on the arm of the couch and looked at his screen. There it was, my face. A photo he'd taken off my phone, the one from last Thanksgiving, where I looked like a man who just realized he forgot to defrost the turkey. Under "What are you looking for?" he'd written, "Someone intimidating, probably older, definitely smarter than you." This is sabotage. This is honesty. Delete it. Can't. Already got 3 likes. 3 people like this? Women apparently find low self-esteem relatable. He scrolled down. "I also said you drive a dented Civic and drink gas station coffee." Full transparency. I stared at the profile. It was, annoyingly, more accurate than anything I would have written. I would have said something careful and generic. Jaden had made me sound like a real person. Slightly pathetic, but real. "Delete it," I said again, but softer this time. Jaden looked at me. "You've been divorced for 8 months, Uncle Reid. You live in your parents' old house. You sleep in a twin bed. At some point, you're going to have to let someone in." That hit differently coming from a teenager. "I just started a new job," I said. And I'm not ready." He shrugged. "Profile's still there when you are." I went to the kitchen and poured gas station coffee into a mug that said, "World's Best Something." The rest rubbed off by years of dishwashing. I stood at the counter and thought about what he'd written. Someone intimidating, probably older, definitely smarter than you. I thought about Vivian Cross in her charcoal blazer and her untouched coffee. Then I told myself that was a coincidence and went to bed. Tuesday morning, Lydia walked Vivian over to my desk. The introduction lasted about 45 seconds. Vivian, this is Reid Calloway. He transferred from Grand Rapids. You're his mentor for the next 6 weeks. Vivian looked at me the way you look at a form you didn't ask to fill out. How many closings last year? She said. 4. Her expression didn't change, but something behind her eyes did. A quick calculation. I'd seen cashiers do the same math when someone hands them expired coupons. 4, she repeated. It was a slow year. Was it slow, or were you? Lydia cleared her throat. Vivian. Vivian didn't look at Lydia. She was still looking at me. Not unkindly. Exactly. More like a doctor assessing damage before deciding whether surgery was worth it. I have a listing appointment at 10:15, she said. Oak and 4th. You're riding along. Okay. Don't talk during the appointment. Got it. And lose the tie. This isn't a funeral. She walked away. Lydia gave me a look that was somewhere between sympathy and amusement. She warmed up to you faster than I expected, Lydia said. That was warm? She usually starts with a quiz. I took off the tie and put it in my desk drawer. It stayed there for the rest of the summer. Vivian drove a black Lexus that was spotless inside. Not clean, spotless. The kind of clean that suggested she either had it detailed weekly or was the kind of person who viewed a crumb on the floor mat as a personal failure. I climbed into the passenger seat with the careful energy of someone entering a museum. My Civic had 3 empty coffee cups in the center console and a receipt from 2024 in the glove box. She pulled out of the parking lot without a word. I buckled my seatbelt. The silence was the kind you could stub your toe on. 2 blocks passed. You can ask questions, she said, eyes on the road. That's the point. About the listing. About anything relevant to the job. What makes you the best agent in the office? She didn't flinch. I prepare more than anyone else. I know the numbers before I walk in. I know the neighborhood, the comps, the seller's motivation, their mortgage balance if I can find it. I don't guess. That sounds exhausting. That sounds like winning. I nodded. What's the listing? 3-bed ranch on a 1/4 acre. Seller is a retired teacher named Harold. His wife passed last spring. He's moving to a condo near his daughter in Michigan. So it's emotional. She glanced at me for half a second before turning back to the road. Every sale is emotional. People don't sell houses. They sell the life they had in them. That was the first thing she said that didn't sound rehearsed. It sounded like something she actually believed. We pulled up to a gray ranch house with a well-kept yard and a birdbath that needed cleaning. Vivian parked, reached into the back seat, and pulled out a folder thicker than anything I'd ever brought to an appointment. Watch how I enter, she said. Watch what I look at first. Watch what I say to Harold and what I don't say. What shouldn't you say? Anything that makes him feel like he's losing something. He already knows he's losing something. My job is to make him feel like he's choosing something. She got out of the car. I followed. Harold met us at the door. He was in his 70s, wearing a flannel shirt and holding a mug that said retired. Do not disturb. He looked at Vivian and his face softened. You're back, he said. I said I would be. Thought I'd get the runaround. That's what the last agent gave me. I'm not the last agent. Vivian's voice dropped half a register, settling into something steady and unhurried. Harold, this is Reid. He's new with our office. He's here to learn. Harold looked at me. Learn from her. She's the only one who actually looked at the house. The others didn't. They looked at the numbers. Harold stepped aside to let us in. She looked at the house. I followed them inside and watched Vivian do something I hadn't expected. She walked through every room slowly. She touched the door frame of the master bedroom. She stood at the kitchen window and looked out at the yard. She asked Harold about the birdbath. My wife picked that out, he said. 20 years ago. We drove an hour to find one she liked. Vivian nodded. She didn't rush past it. She didn't say, "That's sweet," or "I understand." She just stood there with him for a moment, looking at the birdbath through the glass, and let the silence do the work. Then she said, "We're going to find someone who takes care of it." Harold's jaw tightened. He nodded once. I watched this from the hallway, and something shifted. The woman I'd been introduced to, the one who quizzed agents on their closing numbers and told me to lose the tie, was standing in a stranger's kitchen, making a promise about a birdbath. And meaning it. On the drive back, Vivian was quiet for a while. I didn't push it. Then she said, "You noticed." Noticed what? That I spent time in the rooms. Harold noticed too. She adjusted her grip on the steering wheel. Other agents rush the walkthrough. Get to the comps. Get to the pricing strategy. They treat the house like inventory. You don't. A house is the most expensive thing most people will ever own, and the most personal. If I can't spend 10 minutes understanding what it meant to them, I have no business selling it. I looked at her. Her jaw was tight. Her eyes were on the road. But her voice had shifted, just slightly. The way concrete shifts when something underneath it is still settling. There was a story there. Something behind the precision, behind the blazers, and the spotless car, and the perfect preparation. Something she carried into every listing appointment that had nothing to do with commission. I didn't ask. It was Tuesday. I'd known her for 6 hours. But I thought about Jaden's dating profile. Someone intimidating, probably older, definitely smarter than you. And I thought about Vivian Cross standing in Harold's kitchen, looking at a birdbath through a window, holding more weight than she wanted anyone to see. So there I was, one mentor who didn't want me, one nephew who was running my love life, and one desk with a cracked screen protector in an office where everybody whispered the name Vivian Cross like a weather warning. 6 weeks. That's what Lydia had said. 6 weeks of mentorship. Vivian had already started a countdown. I'd seen it in her planner when she opened her portfolio at the listing. A small number in the corner of the page. 42. 42 days until she was done with me. She had no way of knowing those 42 days were going to wreck both of us. Those 42 days started shrinking fast. By the end of the first week, I had learned 3 things about Vivian Cross. She never ate lunch at her desk. She returned every phone call within 90 minutes. And she hated when someone touched her steering wheel. I learned that last one the hard way. We were driving to a staging appointment on Birch Street, and I reached over to adjust the air vent. My hand grazed the wheel. She looked at me the way a librarian looks at someone who just dog-eared a page. "Don't," she said. I was reaching for the vent. "You can suffer. It's 84 degrees. Suffering builds character." That was the rhythm we fell into. Not quite banter, not quite arguing. Something in between that made the car rides shorter than they should have been. The mentor sessions were supposed to follow a structure. Lydia had given Vivian a checklist. Week 1, shadow appointments. Week 2, review listing materials. Week 3, mock negotiations. Vivian threw the checklist into her desk drawer on day 3 and replaced it with something harder. She quizzed me in the car, not politely. She'd pull up to a house we hadn't discussed and say, 3-bed colonial, built 1987, last sold at $215. Price it. I'd need to see the comps. You don't have comps. You have the neighborhood and your eyes. Price it. $260? She'd tap the steering wheel once. $245. The roof has 10 years left, not 20. Look at the gutters. I looked at the gutters. She was right. There was a sag on the east side that I'd missed completely. You see the house, she said. You need to see the problems the house is hiding. Is that a metaphor? She glanced at me, almost smiled, didn't. It's a pricing strategy. That became our pattern. She'd push, I'd stumble, and she'd correct me before I finished falling. And somewhere in the stumbling, I started getting better. Not at her level. Nobody was at her level. But better than the 4 closings a year version of myself that had walked into Mercer and Shaw with an iron tie and no clue. The small moments accumulated in a way I wasn't prepared for. Like the Tuesday she forgot her coffee on the roof of the Lexus, and I caught it before she pulled out of the parking lot. She looked at the cup in my hand, then at me, then back at the cup. "Thank you," she said. 2 words. Said like they cost her something. Or the Thursday, we staged a bungalow on Maple, and she spent 40 minutes arranging throw pillows while I moved furniture. She stood back, looked at the living room, and said, "The couch is 3 inches too far left." 3 inches. "Move it." I moved it. She was right. The room opened up. Something about the sightlines changed, and suddenly you could see the fireplace from the entryway. 3 inches. "How did you know that?" She picked up a pillow and placed it precisely. Because I've been in enough rooms to know when one is lying about its best feature. I looked at her standing in that staged living room. Late afternoon light coming through the window. Holding a throw pillow like it was a chess piece. And I thought something I had no business thinking. I thought she was the most interesting person I'd ever met. Then she told me I'd hung the mirror crooked, and the moment passed. At home, Jaden had made it his personal mission to keep the dating profile alive. I'd told him to delete it 3 times. He'd agreed 3 times. It was still there. "Any matches?" he asked one evening, not looking up from his laptop. "I told you to delete it." That's not an answer. Jaden. 7 matches, by the way. One of them is a veterinarian. She has a golden retriever in her profile picture. That's trustworthy energy. I sat down across from him. "I'm not going on dates right now." Because of the mentor. That stopped me. "What?" "You talk about her. Like, a lot." He scrolled something on his screen. "Yesterday you told me she knew a house was overpriced by looking at the gutters. You said it the way people describe a magic trick." That's professional admiration. "Sure." He turned his laptop around. "I updated your profile, by the way." I looked at the screen. Under "What are you looking for?" the text had changed. It now read, "Someone who makes me want to be smarter. Probably scares me a little. Has their life together in a way I'm still figuring out. Doesn't laugh easily, but when she does, it changes the room." I read it twice. Jaden. What? This sounds like a specific person. It sounds like a type. It sounds like my mentor. He shrugged. "Maybe your type and your mentor overlap. That's not my fault. I'm just writing what fits." I stared at the screen. The description was unsettling because it was accurate, not because Jaden had written it about Vivian. Because I read it and the first person I pictured was Vivian. Every line. Doesn't laugh easily, but when she does, it changes the room. I'd heard her laugh once. Just once. Pete had told a story in the break room about accidentally showing a client the wrong house, and the client loved it so much they bought it on the spot. The whole office laughed, and Vivian's came last, quieter than everyone else's. She covered her mouth with the back of her hand and looked down at the counter. That small gesture had lived rent-free in my head for 4 days. "Delete the profile," I said. "When you stop proving it right," Jaden said, "I'll stop updating it." He went back to his laptop. I went to the kitchen and poured coffee into the world's best something mug and stood there thinking about descriptions that match people you're not supposed to want. The next Wednesday, we had a client meeting at the office. A couple in their 30s, relocating from out of state, first-time buyers. They were nervous the way first-timers always are, which is to say they were asking the right questions but not hearing the answers. The husband kept pulling up Zillow's Chema's listings on his phone. The wife kept apologizing for asking things twice. Vivian ran the meeting. I sat beside her and took notes. She went through the process, explained the timeline, reviewed their pre-approval. Everything textbook and clean. Exactly what you'd expect from the best agent in the room. Then the wife said something. "We keep getting outbid," she said quietly. "This is our fourth agent. We've been looking for a year and a half. I don't even know if we can do this." Her voice cracked on the last word, not dramatically, just enough to hear the weight behind it. The husband put his hand on her arm. The room went still. Vivian set her pen down. "What's the budget?" she asked. Her voice had dropped, not in volume but in register, the same shift I'd heard at Harold's kitchen. 340. Maybe 350 with the gift from his parents. "And you've been looking since when?" "January of last year." Vivian nodded. She didn't rush. She didn't offer platitudes. She sat there for a moment, and when she spoke, it wasn't from the agent playbook. "I know what it feels like to think you'll never have a place that's yours," she said. "Not because I read about it. Because I lived it." The wife looked at her. The husband looked at her. I looked at her. Vivian's jaw tightened, like she'd said something she hadn't planned to say and was deciding whether to keep going. She kept going. "When I was 16, my parents lost our house. Foreclosure. We had 3 weeks to move everything we owned into a storage unit and find somewhere to stay." She paused. 3 different places in 1 year. A friend's basement, a rental that smelled like someone else's life, a motel for 11 days while my mother figured out the deposit on a place we could barely afford. Nobody moved. "That's why I do this," she said. "Not for the commission, because I remember what it feels like to lose the place that holds everything you are. And I don't let that happen to my clients." The wife's eyes were wet. The husband's grip on her arm tightened. Vivian looked at them both, and her voice steadied. "You're going to find a house. We're going to find it together. And nobody is going to outbid you, because I'll make sure the offer is tight enough to win." She picked her pen back up. "Now, tell me what neighborhood you want to wake up in." The meeting ran another 40 minutes. Vivian was precise, efficient, strategic. Exactly the agent the office knew. But I kept seeing that flash underneath. The 16-year-old in a motel room. The woman who'd turned that loss into a career built around making sure nobody else felt it. In the car afterward, I didn't say anything for 2 blocks. Vivian drove, eyes on the road, hands at 10 and 2. "You can say it," she said. "Say what?" "Whatever you're thinking." "I'm thinking you just told 2 strangers something personal, and you're gripping the steering wheel hard enough to leave marks." She looked at her hands, loosened her grip. "It's not something I usually share." "I know." Silence. A stop sign. She turned left onto Main. "Harold's bird bath," I said. "That's the same thing, isn't it? The same reason." She didn't answer right away. When she did, her voice was careful. "Every house is someone's whole life compressed into square footage. I learned that when mine got taken." I nodded. I didn't push further. But something in the car had changed. The silence between us had been uncomfortable for days. Sharp-edged. This silence was different. It had weight, but it wasn't a wall. It was a door she'd left open, half an inch. The office noticed before I did, or before I admitted it. It started with Pete. "You 2 have been on 7 ride-alongs," he said one morning, leaning against the doorframe of the break room. "She's my mentor, that's the job." My mentor was Greg. We did 2 ride-alongs. He showed me how to use the lockbox and told me to figure out the rest. Greg also stores his lunch in the staging closet. Fair point. But nobody rides along with Vivian for 7 sessions. She usually scares them off by session 3. I poured coffee. Maybe I don't scare easy. Pete grinned. Or maybe she's not trying to scare you. I changed the subject. Pete did not look convinced. Then came Darla, the office manager, who had the social instincts of a detective and the subtlety of a car alarm. "I notice you two coordinated colors today," she said, pointing at my gray shirt and Vivian's charcoal blazer. "Those aren't the same color. They're in the same family." "Darla, I'm just observing." "Observe something else." She walked away smiling. I looked down at my shirt, then across the office at Vivian's blazer. They were absolutely in the same family. I hadn't noticed until Darla said it, and now I couldn't stop noticing. I told myself it was a coincidence. The same way the dating profile was a coincidence. The same way the fact that I'd started drinking my gas station coffee black, the same way she drank hers, was a coincidence. A lot of coincidences for 2 weeks. The late night happened on a Thursday. Vivian had a staging deadline, a 4-bedroom colonial on Lakeshore Drive, one of the nicer listings to come through Mercer and Shaw all quarter. The seller wanted photos by Friday morning, which meant the staging had to be done by Thursday night. The furniture delivery ran late. The painter left a streak on the dining room wall. The florist never showed. I was at the office finishing paperwork when Vivian called. She didn't ask for help. She asked a question about the paint color code for the dining room, which I happened to have from the staging file. I gave her the code. Then I said, "Need a hand?" A pause, long enough that I heard her pride wrestling with her timeline. "If you're not busy," she said, which in Vivian's language meant yes. I drove to the house. It was after 8. The sun had gone down. The street was quiet. Every window in the colonial was lit. Vivian's Lexus was in the driveway. Inside, the house was half-staged. The living room and kitchen were finished, but the dining room was a disaster. There were 2 unpacked boxes, a dining table that needed assembly, and Vivian on the floor with an Allen wrench and an expression that suggested the furniture was losing the argument. "The instructions are in Swedish," she said without looking up. "That's just IKEA." "I know what it is. It's still in Swedish." I took off my jacket, rolled up my sleeves, and knelt across from her. We assembled the table in 40 minutes. She held the pieces while I tightened the bolts. We didn't talk about anything important. She told me the trick to staging a dining room was making people imagine the meal they'd eat in it, not the table they'd buy. I told her about the time Jaden assembled an entire bookshelf upside down and didn't realize it until he tried to shelve a book and it slid off. She almost laughed at that. The corner of her mouth pulled. She looked away. "Your nephew sounds like a handful." "He's 15. Handfuls come with the territory." "You talk about him like he matters." "He does." She looked at me then. Something in her expression softened. Not the controlled softness she showed clients. Something less practiced. Something that looked like it surprised her. "That's rare," she said quietly. "What is?" "A man who's good with someone else's kid and doesn't make it a performance." I didn't know what to say to that, so I tightened the last bolt. We finished the staging around 10:30. The house looked ready. Better than ready. Vivian walked through every room the way she always did, slow, touching door frames, checking sightlines. I followed a few steps behind. We ended up in the master bedroom. The staging company had put down white bedding and pale blue pillows. The lamp on the nightstand cast a warm circle on the ceiling. The window looked out over the lake. You could see the moon reflected in the water. Vivian stood at the window. I stood in the doorway. "When I first started," she said, "I thought staging was about making houses look nice. It's not. It's about making them feel like someone already lives there. Like a life is already happening inside these walls, and you're just stepping into it." "Is that why you touched the door frames?" She turned around. The light was behind her, which meant her face was half in shadow. Her expression was unreadable, but her posture had loosened. The blazer was off. She was in a white blouse, sleeves rolled. Her hair was slightly out of place. My mother used to touch every door frame in our house, she said, every morning, like she was checking to make sure it was still standing. After the foreclosure, before. She said it so simply, before, like the fear of losing a home had been in her family longer than the actual losing of it. I leaned against the doorframe. You make houses feel safe for people because yours never felt safe. She held my gaze for 3 full seconds, I counted. That's the most perceptive thing you've said in 2 weeks, she said. Don't ruin it. I'll try. We stood there in that staged bedroom with its fake life and its real moonlight, and I felt something shift between us. Not the banter, not the professional respect. Something underneath all of it that I'd been telling myself was imagined, was coincidence, was just what happened when you spent 8 hours a day in a car with someone. It wasn't coincidence. I was falling for my mentor, and I was doing it badly, and I had no plan for what came next. Vivian picked up her blazer. I should lock up. Yeah. Early morning tomorrow. Lydia wants a full team meeting at 7:30. Right. We walked downstairs. She locked the front door. We stood in the driveway next to our cars, hers spotless, mine dented, and the night air smelled like the lake. Thanks for helping, she said. You didn't have to. I know. She looked at me, opened her mouth like she was going to say something else, didn't. Good night, Reid. Good night, Vivian. I drove home. Jaden was asleep on the couch with his laptop open. I closed it, put a blanket over him, and stood in the kitchen for a long time thinking about moonlight on a lake and a woman who touched doorframes because her mother used to. Then I told myself, for the 4th time that week, that I was reading too much into things. It wasn't convincing anymore. Friday morning, Lydia called the team meeting. 8 agents, a conference room, stale muffins. She stood at the whiteboard and wrote an address in blue marker. 14 Crestwood Lane. Pete sat up straighter. Darla stopped chewing. Even Greg put down his phone. The Morrison estate, Lydia said. 6 bedrooms, 4 baths, waterfront, half-acre lot with private dock access. Listed at $1.2 million. It's the highest value property this firm has ever been asked to represent. She looked around the room. It needs an open house, a real one. The kind that brings in qualified buyers, not tire kickers. She pointed at the whiteboard. I'm assigning 2 agents to co-host. I felt Vivian stiffen beside me before Lydia even said it. Vivian, Reid. The room went quiet and I caught Pete glancing at me while Darla smiled and Vivian stared straight ahead. Vivian, you're the closer, Lydia said. Reid, you're the people person. Between the 2 of you, I want every serious buyer in this county walking through that front door. Vivian's voice was level. You want me to co-host the biggest listing we've ever had with someone who's been here 2 weeks. I want you to co-host it with someone who makes clients feel welcome while you make them feel confident. Lydia adjusted her glasses. That's the pairing. That's the plan. Vivian didn't argue. She just looked at the address on the whiteboard like it was a sentence she'd been handed. 1.2 million. The biggest listing the firm had ever seen, and I was sharing it with a woman I couldn't stop thinking about in rooms that were staged to look like someone's real life. The week before the open house, Vivian and I spent more time together than some married couples spend in a month. And I would know, because I'd recently been one of those married couples. And the comparison wasn't flattering to either arrangement. 14 Crestwood Lane needed work. Not structural work. The Morrison estate was immaculate. 6 bedrooms, 4 bathrooms, a waterfront lot with a private dock, and a kitchen that could host a cooking show. The bones were extraordinary. But the family had lived there for 31 years, and the house still smelled like someone's grandmother. Floral wallpaper in the powder room, a collection of ceramic cats on the mantel that Vivian stared at for a full 10 seconds before saying, "Those have to go." All of them. Every single one. There are 14. I can count, Reid. So the preparation started. Vivian had a staging plan that was 43 pages long. I know because she printed it and dropped it on my desk Monday morning with a thud that made Pete look up from across the room. Light reading, he said. Open house prep. Pete looked at the stack of pages, then at me, then back at the pages. Good luck. People kept saying that. The first 3 days were logistics. Painters, cleaners, a landscaping crew that arrived Tuesday and spent 4 hours edging the walkway because Vivian said the line between the grass and the stone needed to look deliberate. I watched a grown man with a string trimmer redo 6 feet of edging 3 times because Vivian stood on the porch and shook her head. You're terrifying, I told her. I'm thorough. Those are the same thing. She almost smiled, almost. By Wednesday, I'd learned to anticipate what she wanted before she asked. Not because I was getting better at reading her mind, because I was learning her patterns. She always started with the entryway. She always checked the sight lines from the front door. She wanted every room to answer a question before the buyer asked it. The kitchen sells the wife, she said, adjusting a fruit bowl on the island. The garage sells the husband. The master bedroom sells the marriage. What sells the kids? The backyard and the distance between the kids' rooms and the parents. That's dark. That's parenting. I laughed. She glanced at me, and for a second her expression loosened. Not the controlled softness she showed clients, something less rehearsed. Then she turned back to the fruit bowl, and the moment folded itself away. Thursday night, we were at the house until almost 11. The photographer was coming Friday morning, and the dining room still wasn't right. Something about the table runner. Vivian had changed it 4 times and was standing in the doorway looking at the room like it owed her money. I was assembling a bookshelf for the study next door. Fake books. Vivian had ordered them in bulk. Leather spines with titles nobody would ever read, shelved in color order because it photographed better. The blue set goes on the 3rd shelf, she called from the dining room. I know. You had them on the 2nd. I moved them. Pause. Good. That one word felt like a standing ovation. I finished the shelf and walked into the dining room. Vivian was sitting on the floor with her back against the wall, legs crossed, shoes off. Her blazer was draped over a chair. She had a bottle of water and a half-eaten protein bar, and she looked tired in a way she never allowed at the office. I sat down across from her. The hardwood was cold through my jeans. You okay? I asked. Fine. You've said fine 4 times today. Each time you looked less fine than the last. She peeled the wrapper back on the protein bar, took a bite, chewed. My mother called this morning, she said. I waited. She calls every time I have a big listing, every single time. She doesn't ask about the house or the price or the clients. She asks if I'm eating, if I'm sleeping, if I've remembered to lock my car. That sounds like a mom. It sounds like a woman who spent 2 years sleeping in a car because she was afraid to close her eyes in unfamiliar rooms. The dining room went very quiet. Vivian looked at the far wall, not at me. When the bank took our house, I was 16. My brother was 11. My father had already left, so it was just my mom and the 2 of us in a storage unit on Route 9. She paused. People talk about foreclosure like it's a financial event. It's not. It's a demolition. Everything that made you a family, the kitchen table where you did homework, the yard where your brother learned to ride a bike, the bedroom wall where your mom marked your height every birthday, all of it gets taken by a building you've never been inside. I didn't say anything. I'd heard pieces of this before, in the car after the client meeting. At Harold's house when she talked about homes holding lives. But she'd given me fragments. This was the whole thing. My mom worked 2 jobs for 3 years to get us into a rental. It wasn't great. The heat didn't work right, and the landlord fixed things with duct tape and optimism. But it was ours, in the way that rent makes something yours, which is to say temporarily and with conditions. She picked at the label on her water bottle. I got my real estate license at 22, passed on the first try. My first sale was a 2-bedroom condo for a single mother with a 7-year-old. She cried when I handed her the keys. I went home and cried in my car for 40 minutes. Because of your mom. Because I finally understood what my mom had lost. Not a building, a place where she didn't have to be afraid. She looked at me then. Her eyes were steady, but her hands weren't. The water bottle label was shredded. That's why I stage houses the way I do. That's why I touch the door frames. That's why I care whether the fruit bowl is positioned correctly and the edging looks deliberate. Because every client who walks through that door deserves to feel like a home is possible. Not a fantasy, not an investment. A place where you can close your eyes. I sat with that. The dining room of the Morrison estate was staged to perfection. Neutral tones, fresh flowers, a table set for 6 with plates nobody would eat from. It looked like a magazine spread. And the woman sitting on the floor across from me had built her entire career on making spaces feel safe, because she'd grown up in ones that weren't. Vivian. Don't, she said quietly. Don't say you're sorry. I've heard sorry from enough people who didn't lose anything. I wasn't going to say sorry. She looked at me. I was going to say I understand why you're the best agent in that office, and it has nothing to do with your closing numbers. Her jaw tightened. She looked away, but her shoulders dropped just slightly, like she'd been holding something up for a very long time and had set it down for a second. If you've been enjoying this story, subscribing means you won't miss what happens next. There are more stories like this one on the channel. Friday evening, I came home and found Jaden at the kitchen table with his laptop. He had a bowl of cereal, 2 energy drinks, and the expression of someone conducting serious research. New update, he said without looking up. To what? Your profile. He turned the screen around. Under what are you looking for? It now read. Someone who carries more than she shows. Works harder than everyone in the room and won't tell you why. Doesn't need you, but maybe, just maybe, lets you help with the bookshelf. I read it twice. Jaden. What? That last line about the bookshelf. Generic detail. Lots of people have bookshelves. You heard me on the phone with her about the staging. He shrugged. Walls are thin. Jaden. This is a description of a specific person. He looked at me. 15 years old, dark hair in his eyes, cereal spoon pointed at my chest. Uncle Reid. I've been watching you for 3 weeks. You come home from work and talk about this woman the way other people talk about vacations they're saving for. You memorize her coffee order. You iron your shirts now, and you used to just wear them wrinkled out of the dryer. He set the spoon down. Either ask her out or stop pretending the dating profile is the problem. She's my mentor. She's your excuse. The mentorship ends in 10 days. What are you going to do then? Go back to not thinking about her? You can't even manage that now. The kitchen was quiet. The refrigerator hummed. Outside, a car passed on the street with music playing through its open windows, something slow and bass-heavy that faded before I could place it. I don't know if she feels the same way, I said. Jaden looked at me with the patience of someone who'd already figured out the punchline. Uncle Reid, he said. She let you touch the steering wheel. I opened my mouth, closed it. That was one time, and she corrected me. She corrected you gently. Pete told me she once made a client ride in the back seat because he put his coffee in the wrong cup holder. I stared at him. When did you talk to Pete? I came by the office to bring you lunch last week. Pete's chatty. I sat down across from him. The world's best something mug was on the counter. Empty. The house was quiet. My nephew, who was 15 and had no business being this perceptive, had just delivered a better argument than any therapist I'd ever considered seeing. 10 days, I said. 9, technically, Jaden said. So maybe move faster than you normally do, which based on recent evidence shouldn't be hard. Saturday, the open house. Vivian arrived at 7:30, 2 hours before the first appointment. She was in a navy dress and low heels, which was the first time I'd seen her without a blazer. She looked different. Not softer exactly, just less armored. Like the blazer was a wall she'd decided not to bring today. I was already there. I'd driven over at 6:45 and walked through every room the way she did, slowly, checking sight lines, making sure the bookshelf in the study had the blue set on the third shelf. She noticed. I know because she walked through the study, looked at the bookshelf, and said nothing, which, from Vivian, was the equivalent of applause. The first 3 showings went perfectly. Vivian handled the buyers. I handled the small talk. She gave the numbers and the neighborhood data and the school ratings. I told the story of the house, how the Morrisons had raised 3 kids here, how the dock was where their youngest caught her first fish, how the kitchen had been renovated in 2019, but the original farmhouse sink stayed because Mrs. Morrison wouldn't let it go. "You're good at this," Vivian said between showings, straightening a pillow in the living room. "At what?" "Making people feel something about a house they've been in for 12 minutes. You taught me that." She looked at me. "I taught you to read comps and check gutters. You taught me that a house is someone's whole life. I just learned how to say it out loud." She held my gaze for a second too long, then turned back to the pillow. The 4th showing was where things fell apart. The couple arrived 30 minutes early. They walked in before the caterer had finished setting up the kitchen display, which meant there were half-arranged charcuterie boards on the counter, and a woman in an apron looking panicked. At the same time, the landscaper called to say the sprinkler head by the front walkway had burst, which meant there was water pooling on the flagstone path, and Lydia called to say the photographer she'd hired for candids of the open house had canceled, and could we manage with phone photos? 3 problems in 4 minutes. Vivian stood in the kitchen, phone in one hand, looking at the charcuterie disaster with the expression of someone whose 43-page plan had just caught fire. I watched her jaw tighten. Vivian. She didn't look at me. She was calculating, triaging, building a new plan in her head. "I'll handle the sprinkler and the walkway," I said. "You handle the kitchen and the clients. Photos we skip. The house speaks for itself." She looked at me then. "Go," she said. I went. I found the sprinkler valve on the side of the house, shut off the line, used a stack of staging towels to soak the flagstone, and was back at the front door in 8 minutes, with a dry path and mud on my left knee. Inside, Vivian had rearranged the charcuterie into something presentable, charmed the early couple into the living room with a glass of sparkling water each, and was walking them through the waterfront view like nothing had gone wrong. The couple put in an offer before they left. Full asking price. When the house emptied out, Vivian stood in the foyer and exhaled. Not dramatically, just a breath. The kind of exhale you release when you've been holding yourself together with precision and will, and both have finally done their job. "Full ask," she said. "Full ask." She looked at me. "You handled that." "The sprinkler?" "All of it. Without being asked twice, without hesitating. You just moved. You trained me well. I trained you to check gutters." Her voice was quieter now. "The rest of that was you." The late afternoon light was coming through the foyer windows. The house was empty. The caterer had packed up. The flowers on the entry table were starting to wilt, which happens when you stage something beautiful. and then let the day run its course. I looked at Vivian standing in that foyer. Navy dress, low heels, hair slightly out of place from a day of moving through rooms and solving problems and making people believe that a house could hold their future. She looked tired and sharp and real. Vivian. Reid. The mentorship ends in 9 days. I know. And when it does, you won't be my mentor anymore. That's how counting works. I need you to know something before it ends. I took a breath. I'm not confused about what this is. I know the difference between admiring my mentor and wanting to know someone. And what I feel when I'm in a room with you isn't professional respect. She didn't move. I think about the door frames. I think about your mother and the foreclosure and the way you stage a room like you're giving someone a promise. I think about the fact that you let me help with the bookshelf without asking me to leave. And I think about how, for the first time in over a year, I'm not rebuilding because I have to. I'm rebuilding because I want someone to see what I'm building. The foyer was silent. The late light made the hardwood glow amber. Somewhere outside, a boat engine turned over on the lake. Vivian looked at me. Her expression was something I hadn't seen before. Not controlled, not practiced, not the face she wore for clients, or for Lydia, or for the office. She looked afraid. She picked up her portfolio from the entry table, tucked it under her arm, adjusted the strap of her purse. I have to go, she said, and she walked out the front door. I stood in the foyer of a $1.2 million house, with an offer on the table and a silence that felt like a door closing, not slamming, just clicking shut with the careful, deliberate precision of someone who'd spent her entire life learning how to leave a room before it could take something from her. I stood in that foyer for a long time after she left, not because I was waiting for her to come back, because the house was quiet in the way only empty rooms can be quiet, and I didn't know where to go with what I just said. You can prepare for silence. You can't prepare for the specific silence that follows someone walking away from a thing you meant entirely. The offer paperwork was on the kitchen counter, full asking price. The Morrison estate had done its job. The staging, the caterer, the third shelf blue books, and the deliberate edging, and the 43-page plan. All of it had worked. The house had sold itself, because Vivian had made it possible for a stranger to walk in and picture a life. I locked the front door, checked the windows, turned off every light the way Vivian would have, room by room, in order, starting from the back. Then I drove home in the dark, watching the lake catch the last of the sunset through the trees on Route 9. Jaden was at the kitchen table when I walked in. Same position as always. Laptop open, and cereal going soggy beside it. The permanent expression of someone conducting research the world hadn't asked for. He looked up, read my face in about half a second, and set the spoon down. What happened? I sat across from him. The world's best something mug was on the counter where I'd left it that morning. The house hummed the way it always did at night. The refrigerator, the water heater, the settling of walls that had held 30 years of someone else's family before I'd moved back in. I told her, I said. Jaden waited. I told her what I felt, all of it, in the foyer of the Morrison estate after the open house, with caterer crumbs still on the counter. And she left. Jaden didn't say anything for a moment. He pulled the cereal bowl closer, pushed it away again. His face was doing something I hadn't seen from him before, which was the face of someone who'd pushed an experiment further than he expected, and now had to sit with the results. Did she say anything? He asked. She said she had to go. That's not nothing. It's not something either. He leaned back and crossed his arms. 15 years old and already better at sitting in uncomfortable pauses than most adults I knew. Uncle Reid. Yeah. She didn't say no. I looked at him. She said she had to go, he repeated. That's not the same thing as I don't feel the same way. That's not you're making a mistake. That's someone who heard something that scared her and did the thing scared people do. Since when are you a therapist? Since you started using me as one. He had a point. I went to the kitchen and poured coffee I didn't need into the mug with the worn-off label. Stood at the counter and looked at the backyard through the window, where the old swing set was still anchored in the ground, even though nobody had used it in 15 years. She touched the door frames, I said. Not really to Jaden, but to the kitchen and the quiet around it. Every room, every house. She touches them because her mother used to check if the walls were still standing. Jaden was quiet. And today she walked out of a room before I could take something from her. That's what she does. She leaves before the house falls down. The kitchen was still. Outside, a neighbor's sprinkler clicked on, rhythmic and automatic, watering a lawn in the dark. Then you wait, Jaden said. I looked at him. You said the mentorship ends in 9 days. You told her what you feel, she knows. So now you wait, and you let her decide what to do with it. He shrugged. Or you could blow up her phone like a desperate person. But I've seen your texting. It's not your strength. I almost laughed. Almost. When did you get this smart? I've always been this smart. You just started listening. He went back to his cereal. I went to bed in the twin bed my feet hung off of and stared at the ceiling and did what Jaden said. I waited. Sunday passed, then Monday, then Tuesday. Vivian was in the office both days. She wasn't avoiding me. That was the strange part. She said good morning. She answered my question about the Morrison closing paperwork. She handed me a folder of comps for the Birch Street listing and said, "Third page. Note the adjusted square footage." Professional, precise, exactly what she'd been before the foyer. Except she didn't look at me the way she used to. She looked at a point slightly past me, my shoulder, the wall behind my head, the edge of the desk, close enough to pass for eye contact if you weren't paying attention. I was paying attention. Wednesday evening, my phone buzzed. Not a text, a voicemail. From Vivian's number, left at 6:14, which was 20 minutes after the office closed. I listened to it, standing in the kitchen while Jaden sat in the living room. The house was quiet and her voice was steady, or close to it. There was a pause at the beginning, the kind of pause that happens when someone picks up the phone, presses record, and then has to figure out how to say something they've been carrying for 3 days. Reid, it's Vivian. I know you know that. Another pause. I owe you a conversation, not about the listing, not about the mentorship, about Saturday. I left because I needed to, not because I wanted to. That's a distinction I should have made before I walked out of that foyer. A breath. There's bench on the east side of Cedar Lake, past the boat launch, near the birch trees. I go there sometimes when I need to think. I'll be there tomorrow evening around 7, if you want to talk. The message ended. I played it again. Then I set the phone on the counter and looked at the ceiling for a while. Jaden appeared in the doorway. He didn't ask what the message said. He looked at my face and nodded once, like a doctor confirming a diagnosis. 7 o'clock, he said. How did you hear that? Walls are thin. He leaned against the frame. Wear the gray shirt. It makes you look like you tried without trying too hard. Jaden, I'm going back to my laptop. He disappeared. I stood in the kitchen and thought about a bench by a lake, and a woman who'd chosen a place that wasn't staged, wasn't listed, wasn't someone else's life arranged for photographs. A real place where she went to think. That mattered more than the words in the voicemail. Thursday evening, 7 o'clock, the east side of Cedar Lake. The bench was exactly where she'd described. Weathered wood, iron frame, facing the water. The birch trees behind it had peeling bark that caught the last of the light, white and papery. The boat launch was empty. A few ducks floated near the shore, unbothered by anything. Vivian was already there. She was sitting on the far end of the bench with her hands in the pockets of a jacket I'd never seen her wear. Not the blazer. A canvas jacket, olive green, slightly too big. Her hair was down, and she'd left the portfolio and her phone somewhere else entirely. She looked like a different person. Not less precise, just less armored. Like she'd come here as the version of herself that existed when nobody was evaluating the staging. I sat on the other end of the bench. Left space between us. The lake was flat and gold with evening light. Neither of us spoke for a while. The water moved. The ducks drifted. Then Vivian said, "I rehearsed this 3 times in the car." "How'd it go?" "Terribly. I kept sounding like I was giving a listing presentation." "You could just talk." She looked at the water. "I don't do that well, talking without a structure." "You did it on the floor of the Morrison dining room." She was quiet for a second. That was different. "Why?" "Because I wasn't afraid of what you'd do with it." That sentence settled between us. The lake caught a breeze. Small ripples ran across the surface and disappeared. "I'm afraid now," she said, not dramatically, not like a confession in a movie. She said it the way you'd say the weather had changed. A fact about the current conditions. "What are you afraid of?" I asked. She turned and looked at me. Her eyes were steady. Her hands were still in her pockets. "That this is real." I waited. "I build rooms for people, Reid. That's what I do. I build rooms that feel like home so someone else can walk in and believe it's theirs. I'm good at it. I'm the best at it." She looked back at the water. "But I don't live in any of those rooms. I stage them and I leave. I've been staging my own life the same way. Perfect presentation. Nobody inside." A heron landed on the far shore, folded its wings. "When you said what you said in the foyer, I didn't leave because I don't feel the same way." Her voice was quieter now. "I left because I do. And I have spent 20 years making sure that nobody gets close enough to take the floor out from under me again. My mother lost a house, and it nearly destroyed her. I decided I'd never lose one, so I sold them. Hundreds of them. I put other people inside safe walls, and then I went home to an apartment I've barely decorated, because decorating it means I'm staying, and staying means it can be taken. I didn't move. The bench was hard under me. The air smelled like lake water and birch bark. I left the foyer because you were standing in a house I'd staged, a house that wasn't mine, that wasn't real, and you were saying something that was. And I didn't know how to hold both of those things at the same time." She pulled her hands from her pockets, set them on her knees. Her fingers were still for once, not adjusting a pillow, not gripping a steering wheel, just resting. "I'm not good at this," she said. "At what?" "Letting someone see the version of me that doesn't have a plan." I looked at her on that bench, the olive jacket, the birch trees, the light turning amber on the lake behind her. She looked tired and honest and real in a way that none of the staged rooms had ever managed to be. "You don't need a plan," I said. "You just need to stay in the room." Her jaw tightened, then loosened. Something crossed her face that I'd only seen once before, on the dining room floor of the Morrison estate, when she'd told me about her mother and the foreclosure and the ceramic cats. It was the expression of someone setting down something heavy. "I can try that," she said. "That's enough." We sat on the bench. The lake went still again. The heron on the far shore hadn't moved. Everything was quiet in the way that only real places are quiet. Not staged, not arranged, just existing the way they exist when nobody is trying to sell them. Vivian looked at the water for a long time. Then she said, "You're going to be a good agent. You're changing the subject. I'm complimenting you." While changing the subject. She smiled, a real one. The kind I'd seen once, in the break room, when she covered her mouth and looked away. She didn't cover her mouth this time. "Fine," she said. "I like you, Reid. I've liked you since you caught my coffee on the roof of the Lexus and didn't make a joke about it. I had 12 jokes. I know. You didn't tell any of them. That mattered. The space between us on the bench had gotten smaller. I didn't remember either of us moving, but her shoulder was close to mine now, and neither of us moved away. The mentorship ends in 6 days, she said. I know. And after that, I'm not your mentor. That's how counting works. She looked at me. Her eyes were bright. Did you just use my line? It was a good line. She laughed, quiet and warm, the kind that meant something had broken open in a way she wasn't going to put back together. Coffee, she said, Saturday, after the mentorship ends. Not during. I don't date my students. I'm your mentee, not your student. Same ethical gray area. So Saturday. Saturday, she paused. And Reid. Yeah? Not the gas station coffee, an actual cafe, where people sit in real chairs and drink from cups that don't have lids. That sounds like a standard. It is. We sat on the bench until the light was gone. The lake turned dark blue, then silver, where the moon hit it. The heron flew off at some point. The ducks had long since disappeared to wherever ducks go when the day is over. It was just us, and the bench and the birch trees, and the sound of water, doing nothing in particular. I drove home. Jaden was on the couch. He looked at me from behind his laptop, and whatever he saw on my face made him nod slowly, like a chess player watching a move he'd predicted 3 turns ago. Saturday, he asked. Saturday. The gray shirt worked? I didn't wear the gray shirt. Then what did you wear? The blue one. He stared at me. I specifically said gray. I know. And she still said yes. She did. He shook his head and went back to his screen. You're lucky I'm not charging you for consulting. I went to the kitchen, poured water this time, stood at the counter, and looked at the backyard in the dark. The swing set was still there. The neighbor's sprinkler had turned off. The house was quiet in the way it always was at night, creaking and settling and holding its shape the way old houses do. And I thought about what Vivian had said, about staging rooms for other people to live in, about leaving before the floor gets pulled out, about spending 20 years making houses feel like home and never letting her own apartment become one. I thought about my parents' old house, the one I'd moved back into because I didn't know where else to go. The twin bed, the worn-off mug, the posters that were gone. I'd been treating this place the same way she treated her apartment. Temporary and conditional, something I'd leave as soon as I figured out the next step. But I'd hung Jaden's school schedule on the refrigerator. I'd fixed the dripping faucet in the bathroom. I'd started buying real coffee for the mornings, not the gas station kind, because the kitchen felt like a place worth making coffee in. Small things, not grand gestures, just choices that said, I'm here and I'm staying and this is mine now. Maybe that's what home is, not the door frames or the staging or the perfect sight lines, not the square footage or the listing price or the school district ratings. Maybe home is the moment you stop performing for an audience that isn't there and start living in the room you're standing in. Vivian was learning that. I was learning that. And a 15-year-old kid with a cereal bowl and a dating profile had known it before either of us. Saturday was 6 days away. The mentorship would end. The Morrison estate would close. Vivian and I would sit in a cafe with real chairs and cups without lids and see what this looked like without the staging. I didn't know how it would go. I didn't need to. For the first time in a long time, I wasn't trying to predict the ending. I was just staying in the room. If this story meant something to you, there are more like it on the channel.